100 clones of Bill Cosby. It premiered at the non-profit short film festival Channel 101, which was co-founded by Dan Harmon, who quickly took a liking to Roiland's sense of humor. But in June of the same year, they received a cease and desist letter from Bill Cosby's lawyer and were thus forced to end House of Cosby's. Because of this, Roiland decided to make a very obscene and crude parody of the Back to the Future movies as a sort of joke or protest against Universal Pictures. He called the short The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty.
I got my boots! I'm excited! Let's go! Let's get out of here! Marty! Marty, we have a problem! The time travel car won't start! Oh no! What can we do? What are we gonna do?
It was never intended to be anything more than a joke, but Roiland became really fond of his own impressions of the two characters and decided to explore this idea further. Many years later in 2012, Harmon was approached by Adult Swim to create an original animated show for the network. But Harmon, previously creating and working on Community, didn't have any real experience with animation at this point, so he immediately thought of Roiland. He gave him a call and Roiland promptly pitched the idea of using the Doc and Marty characters to produce a show titled Rick and Morty. In the episode Meeseeks and Destroy, we meet a disturbing character known as King Jellybean. This character, like Rick and Morty themselves, is actually from a previous animation that Roiland produced called Unbelievable Tales.
Welcome to Unbelievable Tales. We don't have a lot of time here. I'm sorry. I apologize.
In this animation, the character is known as Crumply Crumplestein and is even more grotesque than the version in Rick and Morty. During the show, you might have noticed a character with rainbow-colored suspenders and an American football on his shirt. The stitches on the football also appear to be in the form of Roman numerals, spelling out 18, 3, and 5. If you use the numbers for the corresponding letter in the alphabet, you get R, C, E. So what does that mean? Well, so far it means nothing, and it will likely remain that way. You see, Roiland explained in an interview that he himself, the creator of Galaxy Falls, Alex Hirsch, and Jason Ruiz, who was working on another animated show called Murder Police, got together one day and talked about including parts of a secret code in each of their shows. So if someone found all three codes and put them all together, it would make a word or a sentence. But for some reason, Roiland was the only one to follow through with this rainbow suspenders guy, and thus the secret code makes no sense. One of the main reasons for the show being made in the first place was Roiland's distinct way of voicing both Rick and Morty. Long before the show began, it was a sort of inside joke among friends for Roiland to make these voices. It's been said that something that really makes the show unique is the way he's able to quickly switch between the two characters and improvise new lines and situations by essentially talking to himself. But this almost didn't happen because at first, Adult Swim didn't want him to be the voice of Morty. Instead, they were looking into other famous voice actors like Billy West and Tara Strong, but Roiland kept pushing his idea of voicing both characters, and eventually he got his wish. The theme song for Rick and Morty actually comes from another animated show that Roiland also produced called Dog World.
My name is Peter Michaels. While on a camping trip with my brother Edmund and sister Sally, we were sucked through some kind of wormhole and transported to another world. Dog World. Now we live with...
It's about humans living in a world with intelligent talking dogs. It was supposed to air on Cartoon Network, but the project was never completed as Roiland simply had too many things in development at the time. All that remains today is the animatic version available online. The episode Lawnmower Dog in Rick and Morty also makes a lot of references to this incomplete pilot. For example, the family in Dog World has a human pet named Ruffles, and in this episode the dog known as Snowball is mistakenly called Ruffles by Rick.
Alright, Ruffles. What's his name?
Snuffles?
Snuffles. Shake.
The father in each show is named Jerry after one of Roiland's real-life dogs. And then at the end of the episode, Rick and Morty makes a very clear and direct reference by saying this.
Wow, a whole world populated by intelligent dogs. I wonder what it'll be like, Rick.
I think it'll be great, Morty. You know, it could be developed into a very satisfying project for people of all ages. I mean, I'd watch it, Morty, for at least 11 minutes a pop. You know, maybe they'll do it board-driven.
You know, that's a real comforting idea, Rick.
What do you know, Morty? What do you know?
Considering that it's a heavily sci-fi themed show and that the initial idea is based upon the characters from Back to the Future, you would assume that the show is about time travel. But so far we haven't really seen anything regarding that topic. Sure, they travel through different dimensions and even stops time between season 1 and 2, but they never actually traveled through time. This is because both the creators think that time travel is simply too powerful and makes everything way too complicated. This is also why they made the first episode of season 2 about manipulating time. They wanted to show the viewers how chaotic and confusing everything becomes, and has described the production of that specific episode as a fucking nightmare because of all the different realities. The fact that they will never create a time travel episode is also highlighted by the box inside Rick's workshop, which is labeled time travel stuff. It's supposed to be a metaphor for time travel stories being on the shelf. It's possible that Rick and Morty and Gravity Falls are somehow connected. In the episode Society of the Blind Eye of the animated show Gravity Falls, a character accidentally drops his pen, notepad and mug through a portal. In the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, these very same items can be seen emerging from a portal. It's also interesting that the Rick and Morty episode was released long before the Gravity Falls episode, which means it was either planned all along or the animators of Gravity Falls saw an opportunity to sort of complete the Easter egg. And it isn't that surprising considering that Alex Hirsch and Justin Roiland are longtime friends. Another connection to Gravity Falls can be found in the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, in which the character Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls is briefly seen. In the episode Get Swifty of Season 2, co-creator Justin Roiland actually makes a cameo appearance as himself. Many of the episode's titles and entire plotlines are allusions to various forms of mainstream media. Some are quite obvious, like Anatomy Park being a reference to Jurassic Park and Look Who's Purging Now being a parody of The Purge. Then there's more obscure episodes like Lawnmower Dog being a reference to the movie The Lawnmower Man. In the same way that a dog becomes super intelligent in the episode, a mentally handicapped person becomes super intelligent in the movie. Me Seeks and Destroy is a reference to the Metallica song Seek and Destroy. The title and premise of the episode Morty Night Run is a reference to the movie Midnight Run. In both cases, the main characters are being chased by the government after helping a wanted criminal. The title of the episode Racing Gasorpasorp is a reference to Racing Arizona, while the episode itself is a parody of the movie Zardos. Unlike many other animated shows, everyone working on Rick and Morty seem to really strive for continuity. Let me give you some examples. In the final episode of Season 1, we see the family house being teleported away and later back again, creating a giant crack around the entire house. This crack remains visible for the entirety of Season 2, and in one episode Jerry can even be seen using a weed whacker because their weed is whack, Joe. I mean, to cut the grass growing out of the crack in the pavement. There's an episode called Total Recall in which alien parasites infiltrate the memories of the characters. The person who brought the parasites into the house in the first place was, of course, Rick, and how that happened is actually covered 2 episodes prior. Rick can be seen loading these green rocks onto his spaceship, which also happens to be covered with these pink parasite pods. And at the beginning of Total Recall,
every other person in the group, and no, not Facebook friends. Turns out that there is a limit. Would be pretty awkward if I brought this up otherwise. It's something called Dunbar's number, and the limit is 150 people. Ever wondered why? Why do you want things? Why do you do things? Why do you feel the way you do about certain things? Why do you keep on living? Turns out that psychology more or less has the answer to all of these questions. Enter the world of dopamine. Dopamine was discovered in Sweden in 1958 and is created in various parts of our brains. It's critical in all sorts of brain functions such as thinking, moving, sleeping, mood, attention, motivation, seeking, and reward. Basically, in its simplest form, dopamine is a want system. It is what keeps us motivated to move through the world, learn, and survive. Research on rats, for example, show that if you destroy dopamine neurons, rats can still walk, chew, and swallow, but will starve to death even when food is right next to them. They have basically lost all desire to eat. Take this example, you're walking through a public square, you're looking around and suddenly see a friend in the crowd. The friend recognizes you, but even though you for a moment is looking right at him, you do not recognize him. Only when your friend stops and says hello, do you realize you just looked right at him and somehow you still missed it. This is because you can only think of one thing at a time. You cannot mentally focus on more than one task, no matter how good you might think you are at multitasking. People are capable of switching between several tasks very quickly though, which can create the illusion of multitasking. We can also learn to do something physical while focusing on another mental task, such as walking and talking on the phone at the same time. However, a study was done with these very circumstances which made it clear that people who talk on their phone while walking bump into other people much more and doesn't really notice and or remember things happening around them. This phenomenon is called inattentional blindness. If I asked you to draw an object, any object at all, what perspective would you draw that object in? From above, from the side, from below? Turns out that most people would end up drawing it like this, at a somewhat tilted angle as if you were slightly above the object looking down. It's called the canonical perspective. The interesting thing is that it seems to apply to almost everything, even objects you wouldn't normally see in this top-down type of perspective, such as a truck or a horse. And when you take a photograph, you're also most likely to take it from this perspective, no matter if you're aware of it or not. We can't really explain why this is exactly, it seems people just like and prefer to view things this way. Some of you watching this might see yourself as a quite logical, self-aware type of person. I know I do. So when you make a somewhat larger decision, you carefully think it through and consider everything before making up your mind. But research shows that although you want to think that your decision making is a conscious, deliberate process, it's not. For example, let's say you want to buy a new TV. You consider the size of the TV that works best in your room, the range of TV brands you're willing to buy from, price versus quality, whether you should get a Blu-ray player, and so on and so on. But the things that has the biggest impact on what TV you end up buying happens unconsciously. Things such as what are most other people buying, or am I the type of person who always has the newest technology, or am I more known to go for shock value like getting a 120-inch TV. This is why we can sometimes feel like we know what is the right thing to do, as in trusting your gut, because unconsciously you've already made up your mind. Have you ever been in a situation where you're, for example, listening to someone explaining something or showing you how to do something, and without thinking about it, you start to imitate those movements? Whether you have or not, it's something our brains learn to do from a very early age. Just watching other people doing stuff causes some of the same neurons in your brain to fire as if you were actually doing those same things yourself. These are appropriately called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons. Mirror. The same thing happens with empathy. When you try to empathize with someone, we are literally experience what others are feeling through these mirror neurons. Mirror. If you want someone to try something new and different, it will work best if you make them happy first. Studies have shown that when people are sad or scared, they want what is familiar. But when we're happy, we're much more likely to try something new and are not as concerned of what is and isn't familiar. This ties in with the fact that when we're sad or scared, we feel much more vulnerable compared to when we're happy, and thus you might feel that you need to protect yourself, even if that new thing you're scared of is a new type of cereal. Among my family and friends, I wouldn't say I'm really known to have the best or most accurate memory all of the time, but here is something I can at least use in my own defense. Memories are not stored like a movie or image like it would be on a hard drive that is ready for use whenever you need it. Instead, memories are actually reconstructed every single time we think of them. But this reconstruction sometimes gets similar events mixed up and sometimes even makes stuff up. For example, imagine this: if you spend time with the same friend at school almost every day, when you remember something from a day where he wasn't actually there, the reconstructed memory might think he was because he usually is. To you, that memory makes total sense and it will seem just as real as the original event. So in a sense, your brain reconstructs the memory you're trying to remember in the way it thinks would be most logical, but not necessarily the most accurate. This is why the testimony of eyewitnesses at crime scenes can many times differ greatly. One thing to keep in mind about, well, everything I've talked about in this video and a lot of the research you'll find about psychology overall is that most of it is being tested on Western audiences. By Western I mainly mean the US and Europe. Why this matters is because another study showed that the way we think is different depending on what culture we come from. It showed, for example, that when presenting different images to people around the world, people from Asia focused on the surroundings and the things in the backgrounds, while people from the West focused on the main or dominant foreground object. And looking at the brain patterns while performing several of these tests revealed that our way of thinking is very different in many ways. The point is that the study revealed that not only are our cultures different, but because of our culture we also think differently. No wonder people can't get along. For those of you who's watched my Top 10 Facts series for some time now, might have noticed a certain structure of how I present my content. I usually, but not always, begin with a fact that is short and just basic. The facts in the middle are somewhat random, and then I end the video with what I think will be most